Hello and welcome to this session as part of the CAS Virtual Showcase 2020. My name is John Chippendall. I'm the CAS Outreach Manager for the Northwest, so I'm speaking to you from a rather drizzly Salford this afternoon. But I'm excited to share that I have Steve Kenny here with me, and I'll introduce Steve in a little bit more detail in a second to run this session all about the AQA's new computer science specification. So just a few housekeeping things before we start. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you would like to ask a question, Steve and I have just had a chat and is happy to take questions as we go, if it's on a particular point that Steve's talking about. And we'll also put together some questions, save some questions for discussion at the end. Please do share on social media your engagement, enjoyment of all the different sessions that we're running as part of the CAS Virtual Showcase. We're using the hashtag CAS Virtual 20. And for you as attendees, you'll see that there is a control panel for GoToWebinar, which you can expand and make disappear again using the orange rectangle. In there you will find that box where you can put questions, and you will also find two handouts to go with Steve's session this afternoon, one of which is the presentation that we're going to be using, and one of which is I think it's just details of the specification, but I'll let Steve explain it as we get to that. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand over to Steve Kenny from AQA to talk you through the new computer science specification. So I'll hand over to you, Steve.
Okay, cheers, John. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for spending a bit of time with me this afternoon. I appreciate it's virtual and you can see me and I can't see you, but I'm hopeful that you'll get a lot from this presentation. It's a presentation we've done a few times. It's about our new GCSE Computer Science Specification. So this is the specification commencing from September 2020 with first assessments in summer 2022. So my name's Steve Kenny. I'm the Head of Curriculum for Computer Science and ICT at AQA. A confession from me, I'm not a computer scientist. I was a physics teacher many years ago, taught in Knowsley just outside Liverpool, became a head of physics in a large comprehensive school. I've been out of education for a number of years, but I've been involved in physics with AQA, and I've been involved with computer science probably for about the last 8 years. I led the development of our A-level and GCSE specs, and I've also been through the various iterations that we've had of the current 8520 GCSE Computer Science spec. So I'll say this session is about the new 8525 spec. So we really want to start the session by just giving you a bit of background of how we got to where we got, just to give you an idea of how awarding bodies work and how you as an individual can become involved with awarding bodies and how you can actually influence the decisions. These decisions aren't made by people like myself just sitting in an office deciding we're going to do what we're going to do. They do take into account teacher views, and we do require teachers to help us through every step of the way. So the way this all started off largely after the issues we had with the non-exam assessment in the current GCSE Computer Science specifications. As you're probably aware, with the NEA, it was originally worth 20%. Then there were some issues around adverse effects created by potential malpractice and so on and so forth. And we ended up with the NEA worth 0%, but still has to be done. So when we started on the journey, in spring 2019, we concept tested our ideas with about 400 teachers. And what we try to do in AQA, we don't just want to talk to AQA teachers who are going to tell us the thing that we want to hear. We do want to hear from lots of different teachers, and we did get quite a lot of non-AQA schools involved. We also require input from large schools and small schools. In AQA, we've got a wide range of centres. A lot of our centres are small, kind of single figures, where it's almost a hobby session for some teachers to deliver. We also have schools, one in the Midlands, which had about 150 students. And really what we want to try to do is get the views from across those schools. I think the feeling was, as you're probably aware, we were told by Ofqual that we had to move away from a non-exam assessment, an NEA or a programming project, and we had to assess programming skills by examination. So what we were asking teachers about is their appetite for a paper-based assessment of programming skills or an on-screen assessment of programming skills. For those who do our A-level computer science, probably aware it would have been really easy for us to just roll our paper 1 process into the GCSE Computer Science. For those not familiar with the AQA A-level, what we do is we have an on-screen programming examination. So we send out some pre-release material, a skeleton program, so it's some code. We allow students to get under the skin of that code and understand what this code's about. And then in an examination, on on-screen examination, sorry, we ask students to amend the code. And I say it would have been quite easy for us to roll out that at GCSE, and I think many people thought that's exactly what we were going to do. And if I'm honest, we thought that's what we were going to do because we thought that's what people may have wanted. In the context of this, we also asked about the availability of hardware in schools to deliver an on-screen examination. We were aware from Ofqual that there were some issues in particular schools about the volume of hardware and also the age of the hardware. Does it work? Is it up to scratch? And coupled with that, it was about the manageability of delivering an on-screen and paper-based exams. Paper-based exams are, fairly straightforward to deliver. An on-screen exam, if you've got a computer lab with 30 machines in it, for example, you need to be aware of the fact that each student needs to be 1.5 meters apart. So in your typical computer lab, you may only have 50% capacity. And really, if at the school in the Midlands where they had 150 students, for them to manage that type of assessment would have been really tricky for them. We also asked about 2 exams versus 3 exams, because again, one of the easiest things for us to do would have been just to simply write a 3rd examination, which was a programming examination. We also spoke to a range of stakeholders. So these were people, we spoke to CAS, we spoke to people in CAS. We also have strong links with a lot of PGC providers. I'm talking to the PGC providers and former teachers who were coming through the process. And really what we did, we took all of those ideas and condensed them down to develop our approach to the testing of programming skills in an exam. Just to remind you, the Ofqual definition of an exam is that all the students taking a particular specification do an exam at a particular time on a particular day. So we weren't allowed to have a window, a week's window or 2 weeks window to do these exams. What we then did, we kind of refined things down and we held face-to-face events in Guildford, London and Manchester, and we spoke to 40 teachers. And these were face-to-face meetings. They were a couple of hours after school. And really, the questions we were asking was about the content and structure of our spec. How much does it need to change? Whether we should use pre-release materials or preliminary materials. A lot of people initially thought the use of the use of preliminary materials was a good thing initially. But then when you start getting into the nuts and bolts of it, teachers were saying to us, what tends to happen with preliminary or pre-release materials is the students get a little bit stressed as they start to go through the process. They become so focused on the material itself and not necessarily the skills. And also for teachers, it creates a lot of stress for teachers. Teachers feel like they have to teach the preliminary materials to the nth degree. We also asked about different assessment models. We asked about how people liked our current question papers and mark schemes, and also about our resources. Are the resources that we use up to scratch? Do they need updating? So where we ended up was that teachers told us, so we're looking at the initial 400 and now the 40. Teachers said they didn't want an on-screen or online examination. Okay. At first, the momentum was very much in favour of on-screen and online, but then when you start to delve into things a little bit more deeply, people realise the kind of practicalities and the practical implications of it. Personally, I think online exams across the board in subjects, a wide range of subjects, will eventually become an industry standard. I think the process we've got at the moment, the paper-based examination, given the current situation that we're in, I think there are reviews of where that leads. However, I think it's a long way off, but I think it's pushed onto the agenda. People also said that what they didn't want was a single high tariff question. If we go back to the DFE subject content, the DFE subject content says that students must design, write, test and refine program code. Okay, that can't be changed without a consultation. And what Ofqual didn't do or didn't want to do was to go through an entire consultation again to change the DFE subject content. So when we spoke to teachers, they were saying they would rather break things up into a design question, a write test and a test, and a refine question, 4 separate questions, or even better still, subparts of questions. Teachers didn't want pre-release materials, which again, kind of was born out of the conversations with the 40 teachers that we spoke to. The pre-release were just seen as more stress, essentially. Surprisingly, people didn't want any more examinations. They felt that 2 examinations were absolutely fine. But the thing they did want from us, they wanted us to be clear on where we were assessing the programming skills. So they didn't want programming skills just randomly scattered through both examinations. They wanted us to ensure that the assessment of programming skills was in one single place, and students were clear that when they went into the exam, that they were being assessed on their programming skills and abilities. So that's kind of what we did. Other things teachers said was they wanted some stability. As you're probably aware, the spec was first launched in 2016, and I think pretty much every year since we've had some changes somewhere to some aspect of the qualification. I was just looking through a few days ago about, we have to do a thing called a qualification change form, that when we change the specification, we have to show off what we've done. And we're doing one at the moment for the 8520 spec, which I'll talk about at the end if we've got a bit of time. But I was looking at the number of qualification change forms that we've produced for computer science, and it's been a fair few, to be honest. And teachers were saying, we just want to get to this next stage and have some stability. They wanted a lot of consistency between the current and updated specifications. I'm using the word updated because it's not a new specification as such, in the fact that the DFE subject content hasn't changed. So what we've done is we've updated the spec to reflect the fact that the NEA, or the programming skills, are now assessed in an examination. Teachers also said that they wanted us to clearly distinguish between the current and the updated spec, have separate question papers for each programming language, and really make it clear to them and the students how we'd intend to assess syntax in exams. Because one of the big concerns was teachers were saying, well, if the syntax isn't right, if the student makes a mistake early on in the syntax, are you going to penalise that? What are you going to do? How can we advise the students? You can see the list there. The teachers were saying they liked the fact that the spec was straightforward, the fact that we've got a content section and additional information section. They like our question papers, mark schemes are easy to follow, and the continuity. So we did all that. We take all those things on board, and we made some changes to the specification. As John mentioned before, there is a version of the specification as part of this presentation. So what we've done is we've taken an early draft of the specification, and what we've done is we've showed you where all the changes are. So where things are in blue, so it's all color coded, where things are in blue, these are clarifications from the 8520. Where they're in green, it's additions, and where they're in red, it's deletions. Okay, so the first thing we've done is, you can see there, we've changed the spec code from 8520 to 8525, and we've changed the front cover imagery of the specification. So as you go through that, hopefully that should be really easy for you to follow, and where you have got resources, you should be able to identify where those resources need to change. If you look in the spec, it looks like there's a lot. There genuinely isn't. A lot of it is the clarifications. So we've changed the language a little here and there. So for example, I think we've changed analog signals to sound signals. So a lot of the changes are fairly minor. There are a couple of sections, so there's SQL and relational databases that we've put in there, but we've also taken some stuff out. I would urge you to use that for reference only. When you do commence your teaching in September, make sure you look at the latest version of the 8525 spec on the website. Clearly, there may have been 1 or 2 slight tweaks and changes, so I'd say I would urge you to do that. So you're probably aware of our current spec. It's 2 papers and an NEA, hour and a half for each paper, 80 marks, 50% weighting. And the NEA, It's 20 hours worth of work, or the programming project, 20 hours worth of work, the students produce a written report. So the changes that we've made in the paper one, it's still a written examination. But in the paper one, we've removed the fundamentals of data representation and computer systems. So we're just looking at fundamentals of algorithms and programming. We've increased the duration from 1 hour and 30 minutes to 2 hours. And we've increased the marks from 80 to 90. The reason for increasing the duration was really to give students thinking time. Again, writing code in an examination, what we don't want to do is put the students under so much stress that they make errors in the code. So that the 2 hour duration, the extra 30 minutes duration is really there to give them a bit more thinking time. We've increased the marks and we've left the weighting as 50%. And you can see there the type of things that we're going to ask. So our paper one paper will be the paper in which we assess programming skills from students. So in paper two, we've made a few changes in terms of the content. We've moved we've included the relational databases. We've also changed the title of the cybersecurity section. The assessment itself has changed as well. So it's gone up from 1 hour and 30 minutes to 1 hour and 45 minutes. We've increased the number of marks from 80 to 90, but again, it has a 50% weighting. The reason we increased the number of marks in each of the papers is really, from our point of view, for awarding purposes. What we try to do in the award is put 9 grade boundaries across the full range of marks. Okay. In the previous specification, we originally had 240 marks to play with because it was 80, 80, 80 for all aspects. And then once the weighting of the NEA was removed, that went down to 160 marks. So what we've done is we've added an additional 20 marks just to give us more space in terms of the grade boundaries. When we award the grades, the thing we're looking for is as wide a grade boundary as possible. And in that way, we can be confident that the grade boundaries are secure. Just by way of a really daft example, if we had 9 grade boundaries over 9 marks, it would be really difficult to distinguish a grade 8 from a grade 7 and a grade 7 from a grade 6 because there's simply just not enough room. Whereas with a wider boundary, there's far more security in the middle of that boundary itself. You're probably aware that the NEA, or the programming project, has been removed or will be removed from summer 2022, but it will be replaced by programming skills. And students must still be given the opportunity to design, write, test and refine programs as part of their course of study. So clearly what we don't want is, or what we're not going to request, is samples of students' work, because they are going to be assessed in paper one anyway. So if someone like me who could deliver the theory but couldn't deliver the programming, my students would be a huge disadvantage. So what we're trying to do is really encourage programming as an essential part of the course itself. With the programming skills, schools still need to provide a practical programming statement. Okay, so unlike the current statement that you provide that says that you've set aside 20 hours in the timetable and some other criteria, this is really just a statement to say, my students have had the opportunity to program. There's no time limit in it. There's no kind of criteria to it. It's really just so we can reassure ourselves that the programming skills have been a key part of the preparation for the exam. Again, the reason that's still there is because it's in the DFE subject content, which says it must be part of the subject itself. So that might seem just a little bit of administration for the sake of administration. It's not. It's really just to make sure that students are getting the full experience. So in terms of the subject level content changes, simple table here of what's changed, what we've added in and what we've taken out. I think the best thing to think about is, rather than the what's changed, if we look at the what's been taken out first, that will give us a much better understanding of why we've now added more content in. So the big thing is the need to set aside 20 hours in the timetable for programming. So in essence, you've still got to complete the programming task, but you don't have this 20 hours restrictive, has to be done in the classroom. So your programming could be done as homework tasks, it could be done as extracurricular tasks, whatever that may be. So in effect, you've gained a fair chunk of time from this change from the practical programming project. We've taken out creating Huffman trees. That was in response to a lot of the teachers who said they just didn't like it. The students were finding it really tricky. We've taken out adware. We've taken out the theft of computer code, copyright and hacking from the legal and ethical section. And we've also removed the aspects of software development. What we've added in a new section called Programming Skills in Section 5. And it really sets out the requirements of what you need to do to complete the practical programming statement. What we are doing as part of our resources, we're producing 3 what we're calling programming challenges. So these programming challenges are being produced by the principal moderator, who is the person who would have essentially looked at the programming and had the responsibility for the programming project. With the programming challenges, they're not activities that have to be completed. They're not compulsory in any way, shape or form. But what we're saying to people is, if your students complete 1 or more of those challenges, you could confidently sign the practical programming statement to say that your students have had a suitable experience. So they're currently on SKM, Secure Key Materials. There's one there, there's one due to go up in a couple of weeks. Plus there's a teacher's notes and there's a marking scheme in there. Things that have also been added in is comparison of quantities, exclusive OR gates. The reason for putting that in is really just using AND or NOT gates was a bit restrictive from our point of view in terms of questions we could ask, and things were becoming quite formulaic. So we added XOR gates in there. We've also added in creation and interpretation of simple Boolean expressions, and as I mentioned before, relational databases and SQL. Things that have changed. As I say, the design, write, test and refine of programs is now just a part of the subject content. We've changed some of the terminology. We've also combined a couple of sections, so sections 3.10, 3.2.10 and 3.2.11. We've combined that into a new section, and we've removed farming from the social engineering. So that's a high level overview. If you do go back and look at the specification that's given as part of this presentation, you'll be able to see the details in the changes in a lot more detail. Assessment objective weightings, as you're probably aware, these were changed in 2017 to allow for the removal of the weighting of the NEA, and there was a range of weightings. There was less emphasis on AO3 and more on AO2. With this updated specification, we've reverted back to the original assessments objective weightings as per the DFE subject content. So 3 assessment objectives, AO1, 2 and 3. AO1 is really just about recalling knowledge. AO2 is about the application of knowledge, and AO3 is really programming. It's the practical side of the qualification. And you can see there, the 54 of the 180 marks, or 30% of those marks, are around students being able to program. I put any questions there. Normally in the presentation, I'd take a break to take some questions. I'm aware I can see in the chat box that John's getting some questions, and John said that he will kind of sing out any that are pertinent, but do feel free to kind of continue your questions, and I'll just move on with the presentation.
Yeah, I'll send any over that come through at the moment, Steve, if you want to carry on, and then I'll interrupt you if that's okay.
Okay, great stuff. Cheers, John, thank you. Okay, so looking at the paper 1 assessment. So what are we assessing? We're assessing computational thinking, code tracing, problem solving, and programming. And the subject content from this specification comes from section 3.1 and 3.2 of the specification. Okay, remember in the specification, we have the subject content and we have the additional information. The subject content is the content that we assess in the examinations. The additional information really gives you as a teacher the parameters of around which we're going to do those assessments. So, excuse me one second. So paper 1 is available in one of 3 languages, so C#, Python 3 and VB.NET. Each of the languages will have a separate examination paper. So when your examinations officer makes an entry, you make an entry for a specific language. What we'd originally planned to do was we'd planned one single question paper with all 3 languages in. The teachers told us that's not what they wanted. They wanted individual papers. In the context of your class, you don't all have to do the same language. Students can do, you could have 3 students doing 3 different languages. That's absolutely fine. The reason we've picked the languages is because they're stable and they're free. There's not going to be updates to those languages in the near future. And so we can, when we start to write the assessments, we're confident that the way the programs are written in the paper will continue to be the way the programs are interpreted.
Steve, can I
just
ask
to get
you?
As a yes, sorry, John.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just had a question come through. I just wanted to put it to you. So the question is, previously students were not penalised if answering pseudocode questions with code. Will this still be the case since there are clear pseudocode questions now?
It's a good question. It depends the way the question's worded. If the question specifically asks students to write in pseudocode, the likelihood is now that when we say penalised, the likelihood is now we would expect an answer in pseudocode. However, if a student has written in code, we tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. So they probably wouldn't get all the marks available, but they may get some of the marks. So it's a bit, what we always try to do in AQA, we always try to reward the students for what they can do. And I hope that answers the question. I appreciate it's a bit of a fudge of an answer.
Cool, thank you for that.
Okay, so right. So in terms of the languages, as I said, students can do any language they wish, and they're unique to the paper. The other 2 languages that we used to use were Pascal and Delphi. Pascal, Delphi, and Java. We've actually dropped those languages simply because the entry was so small. About 2% of our cohort was Java and Pascal. Put that in context, we've got our entries around about 15,000 students, and we didn't think it was really viable for us to be able to write 5 papers, 2 of which were going to support 2% of the cohort. So we will support teachers using Java and Pascal to change to the other 2 languages. One of the big challenges that we had when we were doing the A-level redevelopment was to reassure both yourselves as teachers and Ofqual about the comparability of demand across the papers and the fairness of the award. So in other words, what we'll do with these papers is they won't all be awarded separately. So you won't end up with, for example, a C# grade 7 at being, I don't know, 100 out of 180, whereas a Python grade 7 is 93 out of 80, and a VB is 120 out of 180. So we won't do that. They'll all have exactly the same grade boundaries. And the reason for doing that is that we're confident that with the programmers that we have, so the people who write our exams are actually teachers, practicing teachers, and they're experienced programmers, and they're clearly computer science teachers. We're confident that we can have comparable levels of demand across all 3 papers. And in that respect, we're confident in the fairness of the award itself. So the way we're going to move on to assess the programming in paper 1. So as I mentioned before, there'll be a separate paper for each language. In the context of a question, so this would be a typical question, we would reiterate the language in the stem of the question. Clearly, if a student had got the wrong paper, and in this Python paper, they wrote in C#, they wouldn't just get a big red cross to it and it wouldn't be marked. What we would do is we will give that to a C# specialist to mark. So what we will try to do with these papers is to get them marked by people who are specialists in each of the languages. Okay. In the question itself, we're going to have some really easy to follow instructions. Okay, so the students can go step by step through what they need to do in the examination itself, what they need to do in the paper itself. One of the big questions we got very early on was about indentations. Because students are handwriting code, how can we as AQA differentiate between the case of letters? How can we ensure that the indentation's correct? So what we've done in this case is we've produced an answer grid with the indentations to help you students to indent the code as they write in the examination paper. Because we are aware it's it's not an easy thing to do for students. They've got the 2-hour pressure of the examination, and for a lot of students, it's a kind of try to get through as quick as you can. But what we really want to try to encourage students to do is take that time to, right, there's the question, sit back, have a think for a minute or two, and then start to plan your programming. Clearly, as with any exam, if the students make a mistake, put a big line through it and get another piece of paper and start that again. The mark schemes, again, what we have to do in the mark schemes, we have to show where the assessment objectives are coming from. So in this 7-mark question, you can see that there are 2 marks for AO3 design and 5 marks for AO3 program. When we're producing mark schemes, the thing we don't want examiners to do is to put their own interpretation on a mark scheme. So the thing we're judged on, all awarding bodies are judged on, is the consistency of our marking. So what we will do in these mark schemes is we'll offer really easy to follow instructions for examiners. We've told examiners to ignore the case of the program code, as I mentioned before, and then we will give a fully worked example. So that fully worked example isn't the only example. That's simply an example there to help the examiners as they start to work through the mark scheme. So you can see in this mark scheme, there are 7 marks and there are 7 marking points. And so students can gain, anywhere from 1 to 7 marks. The thing we don't want to do is we don't want to have questions where students can only gain either 1 or 7 marks, so everything has to be correct. So this mark scheme really allows for the full range of students' answers. Syntax. The big thing really with syntax is we've told the examiners not to penalise students for minor syntax errors. Okay, so as long as the flow of the program is correct and the logic is correct, the students will 9 times out of 10 gain full marks. A simple syntax error they won't lose marks. Sorry, I'll repeat that, because students never lose marks. Students always start an exam with 0 marks and build their mark tally up. They never lose marks. Students fail to gain marks. So they won't fail to gain marks for minor syntax errors. If there is a syntax error that's catastrophic in terms of the way the program would have functioned, that's going to be an issue. If it's a minor error that doesn't really affect the program that much, that will be deemed to be a non-error in effect. Okay, I hope that puts your mind at rest. If you go onto the website, onto SKM, there are some example responses for students writing computer program code, and we've shown in there how we're going to deal with syntax in the examinations. Okay, so paper 2. Paper 2 is our familiar style of exam for schools, a mix of multiple choice, short answer, long answer questions. You're probably noticing in most AQA papers, there's always an OTQ or a multi-choice question somewhere or other. And what's assessed is subject content from sections 3.3 to 3.8, and also SQL and the relational databases topics. Again, in terms of the specification, in terms of the assessment, sorry, John.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt then. I've just got a question particularly relating to the point you were talking about there. Have you got any examples of sort of what you're calling minor and major errors? I know you were talking there about, the syntax errors. Do you have any sort of bank of them, examples of them?
Yeah, John, if teachers go on to secure key materials, so that's the secure area of the AQA website, I think there are examples covering all 3 languages, a handful of questions, I think it's about half a dozen questions with kind of a good response, a medium response, and a poor response. So if people look at that, you can see the nature of how we'll deal with syntax. So if you look at those questions, it should explain in there. If not, if people do have any questions, I'll give my email address at the end and people can email me and I'll help them through the process.
Brilliant, that's great. Thanks very much.
Okay, right, so just moving on to paper 2. I think we got up to this bit. So again, with the paper 2, we'll give students, it's a fairly standard examination paper. But again, there'll be fairly clear and unambiguous instructions about what the students need to be able to do, okay? And again, the mark scheme, we always give a breakdown of the AOs and the marking instructions, and then we'll give an example. And again, with the example, it's not the, it's an answer in the fact that it's a model answer. It's not the only answer, okay? Because, you know, unlike most questions where there is only one answer, with programming, we're aware that there will be a variety of answers in the way students answer programming questions. Right, resources. We are updating all our resources. All the AQA resources are free. So we're producing new teaching guides on SQL and relational databases, plus structured programming and subroutines. People may not be aware, but a company called Teach-It produced 20, I think it was 21 or 24 lesson plans for us, covering a wide range of topics, and they're currently on the AQA website. The lesson plans basically contain teacher notes, PowerPoint presentations, and students' activities, and they're free of charge on the website if people want to use them. I do a lot of talks with PGC students and always direct the PGC students towards these lesson plans as well, because they do find them particularly useful. And we will be updating the scheme of work. There are also three of the four, currently there's 4 publishers. There's Cambridge, Hodder, ECS, and PG Online, who produce the AQA approved textbook. Clearly, with the changes to the specification, publishers are going to need to change their textbooks and re-seek approval from AQA. So at the moment, there are 3 of the 4 publishers in the process, and I'm pretty sure that the majority of those 3, that would be 2, 2 of those 3 are aiming to get textbooks out by the start of September. Okay. We're also producing a wide range of new resources, as I mentioned earlier about the programming challenges. Again, they're not compulsory. They're there to help you. You can take them, you can adapt them, you can really do what you want with them. We just produce those because teachers were asking to have something for them to understand the depth in which programming needs to be done. The additional sample questions and examiner comments are also there, and the additional sample questions for new topics are in production. So that'll be things like SQL and relational databases. And the glossary is also there as well. That should be on the public facing AQA website. So I mentioned before about resources available on SKM. So if you go into SKM, under the 8525, you can see teacher support materials. So you can see there the first of the 3 programming challenges. So there's the challenge itself. There's some additional files that students may use containing data, and then there's notes and guidance for yourself as a teacher. The second one of those is in production, and the third one we're hoping to be ready by certainly the end of the year, if not sooner. But again, with those challenges, they're just a resource. You can update, use, share, whatever you need to do with those things as well. The example responses and programming, we've got paper 1 for all 3 papers. And they were produced by the developers for the specification, and they're being checked by the chief examiner so that we know that they are of the right standard. And then there was a Preparing to Teach meeting in spring 2020, which you may have attended. A guy called Steve Backrack, who's one of the senior examiners for the current specification, produced that for us. So the presentation slides and then the annotated specification is also there. That's the same specification as you're going to get today as well. I think that's pretty much all from me. Yeah, that's all from me. If you do have any questions, save you type them into John, and I'm happy to sit here for a bit and answer some questions.
Yeah, super. Thanks very much, Steve. So we've got a few questions that have come through. So if I just run through these, and if anybody else has got any questions, please pop them in the question window as we're discussing these. So first of all, I will be teaching AQA Computer Science for the first time this year. Are there teacher and student books that I can buy to help me and the students? I'm not sure whether some of these actually the questions came through earlier and you might have covered it off at later points, but that was the first one.
Okay, as I said, John, 3 of the 4 publishers are currently in the process of producing textbooks. Certainly one of them is very much down the line and another one's not too far behind. They are hoping to have textbooks available by September. I mean, if not, what you could kind of use if people have got older versions of textbooks, you could kind of use those for some of the topics, because some of the topics haven't changed at all. So short answer is yes, there will be some books available from publishers.
Super, thank you. Then we had, oh yeah, so someone is actually asking, can we have a recording of this meeting? And I left that question on there just to remind me to tell you all, because I forgot to say in the introduction that this is being recorded, and I've been noting down sort of timings of the different sections, because we're going to be using the videos and making them available within the CAS website. So yes, it will become available in the future. Next question is, students usually have to use specific exam answer paper when they need extra paper in an exam. Will the exam board provide official square paper with the grid style for answering programming questions?
Yes.
There we go, that was the easy one, yeah. So that's all being covered. Is there a link for the TeachIt resources that you mentioned?
Yeah, if people go on to the AQA website, under resources, there's a tab called lesson plans on the day. What I can do, John, I'll find the link and I'll send that to you later today. And if you want to share it with people, that's absolutely fine. But they're actually on the public facing website, so they're not on SKM, just a public.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to try and pull that up now and put it into the chat box.
Okay.
So let's find. Oh, someone sent it to me. Thank you. Let's just double check. Did you say it's under the lesson plans section?
Yeah, if you click in lesson plans, John,
yeah,
should be, there's 21, 24 lesson plans in there.
Yes. Yep. I've got them. So thank you. I can't say your name because for recording purposes, but let me share what's just been sent to me into the chat. There you go. So those are now in the chat for everyone to access, and thank you to those people that sent them to me. And let me just check my. So I think the other questions have been you covered as you were going through. A couple of people are just saying very informative, very interesting. Thank you very much for the session, Steve. So unless anybody's got any other questions, and I'll just give it a moment to see if any others come through. Now, a few people just saying really useful, Steve. Thank you very much. So thank you for sharing all of that information, Steve. So I will just finish by saying then that when we finish the webinar in just a moment, there will be an evaluation form that appears. So if you can just take a moment to complete the evaluation form, that'd be really useful for myself and the CAS team. And I hope to see you on some of the other CAS Virtual Showcase 2020 sessions over the remainder of this week as well. So thank you very much, Steve, and I will say cheerio for now, and I will see you in some of the other sessions. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.